Eu vejo isso como uma coisa fantástica, porque o jiu-jitsu é uma forma de educação. O jiu-jitsu é uma forma de você, como dizia o velho Carlos Gracie, transformar frouxos em homens, poltrões em machos.
Eu falo pra todo mundo que eu não pago carro porque eu sou o karma dos outros. Você sabe? O jeito do maluco, o jeito que eles chegam. Bati muita gente, ainda mais no Rio de Janeiro, que nunca teve tipo, coragem de fazer alguma coisa, porque a família também é muito importante. Então, vai matar, vai querer me fuder, vai se fuder depois. Então, todo mundo tem pai, todo mundo tem filho, todo mundo tem mãe. Tira um filho meu que eu tiro dois teus, 3 a tua mãe também.
Telefone, Rolizinho.
Com ele no colo. Olha lá, papai. Vem cá, Rolizinho, senão você vai levar
When I first met Renzo Gracie, I had no idea what being a Gracie really meant. Around 1500 BC, Buddhist monks in India were forced to create a technique allowing them to stop attackers without striking. Jiu-jitsu, which means gentle art, was adapted by the warrior class in Japan who for centuries kept as a secret weapon, never to be taught to outsiders. In 1914, the Japanese judo champion Misuyo Maeda, known as Conde Koma, migrated to Brazil. He helped establish a Japanese community in the Amazonian state of Pará. His efforts were aided by Gastão Gracie, a Brazilian diplomat of Scottish descent. As an expression of gratitude for his efforts, Conde Koma agreed to teach Gastão's older son, a troublemaker named Carlos, the essential secrets of jiu-jitsu.
Ele foi assim, moleque de rua, entendeu? Apesar de ser de boa família, né? Bem nascido e tudo mais, mas viveu muito na rua, Belém do Pará, aquela coisa toda, né?
O menino brigando, ia brigando com todo mundo, brigava até com o cachorro. Ele era um guerreiro.
In 1925, the family moved to Rio de Janeiro. And at the age of 23, Carlos opened his first jiu-jitsu academy. He taught his brothers Osvaldo, Jorge, and Gastão Jr. what he had learned, and enlisted them to help him.
Mas quem acreditava naquele menino franzino, louro, de olhos azuis? Aquele gringuinho. Eu não levava a sério, ele não tinha aluno.
Esse negócio de kimono, será que isso funciona mesmo? Queria ver se fosse na porrada na rua, ou de calção aí na praia, como é que fica, não sei o que e tal. Aí me passavam também a fazer provocações para os alunos que frequentavam a academia. Pô, se garante mesmo esse negócio e tal. E às vezes eram lutadores profissionais, fortes, entendeu? Então, isso mudou a cabeça do meu pai, né, que era quem dava toda a diretriz, né, política, filosófica e tudo. Aí ele falou, não, vamos ensinar, vamos aprofundar agora o conhecimento dos alunos, aí, vamos ensinar mesmo para valer, vamos formar uma equipe aí, para ninguém botar defeito.
The only way to prove that the style work or not is by fighting. So they start to challenge everybody.
You wanted to prove how, the effectiveness of jiu-jitsu. Well, they even put like an ad in newspaper.
Ads like, if you think you're a tough guy, show up at this address.
If you like to beat up women, if you like to be a bully, you can come on over to this place and it will be a pleasure to break your nose or break a few ribs of yours or knock some of your teeth out.
Achavam que aquilo num combate real, de rua, de defesa pessoal, não valia nada, né? Porque como é que o cara vai me levar para o chão se eu sou um lutador de boxe, ou de Muay Thai, ou de qualquer outra arte que seja, capoeira? Então começou aquela polêmica, essa luta aí é luta que não serve. Então não tinha como haver uma comprovação, porque as regras das lutas eram totalmente diferentes umas das outras. Então, como não tinha outra alternativa, então foi o seguinte, vamos criar uma luta, um evento de vale tudo. Vale tudo é, você faz o que você puder e eu faço o que eu puder para me defender como se fosse na rua. Sem regras. Pode fazer o que quiser, até morder, dedo no olho, o que for.
This event is a good example of what the early Vale Tudo matches felt like. At first, they took place on concrete floors or inside academies behind closed doors. As the word spread, they moved to crude rings made of plywood, rope, and 2x4s. Almost 70 years before the Open Fighting Championship was created, Carlos already had discovered the ultimate way to prove himself.
Cara de outras modalidades, que vim conferir, ver se o negócio funciona e tal. Então, o jiu-jitsu foi vencendo um por um todos os desafios e foi se firmando.
It wasn't long before the Gracie's ability to quickly defeat opponents was beginning to attract attention.
Os outros irmãos já se emanciparam, né? Tio Gastão foi para São Paulo, tio Oswaldo foi para Minas Gerais e finalmente o tio Jorge, que até então seguia a orientação dele, também resolveu se emancipar e tal, que era, na época era o número 1 da família.
Remarkably, it was Carlos' youngest, weakest brother who would prove to be the family's secret weapon.
O que é um homem fraco? Oh, eu sou um, nasci fraco e vou morrer fraco. E passo por forte porque sei jiu-jitsu.
And my granduncle Hideo was so weak physically that he start to improve the technique in terms of defense. Like he believed that the most efficient defense would always win the fight. Like if he could not lose, he probably would win. He was one of the biggest innovator of the actual today's jiu-jitsu, you know?
É que o jiu-jitsu japonês é feito da base da força. O meu não depende de força. Eu tenho mais força no dedo que qualquer um tem na mão. Depende da posição da mão dele, depende da posição do meu dedo. Toda agressão, seja ela qual for, de que maneira for, entre o início e o fim tem um espaço que você é fraco. Eu pego todo mundo nesse espaço.
Hélio, he used to win most of his fights from the bottom. So he developed the defense because most of the guys that he was fighting was heavier than him. So the heavier guys were putting him on that position so much that he had to develop ways to beat guys on that position.
Motivated by these new techniques, Carlos started to arrange professional matches for Hélio. The first, in 1932, put him against the Brazilian lightweight boxing champion, Antonio Portugal. Hélio got Portugal to the mat and applied an arm lock to win the fight in under 30 seconds. Later that year, Hélio competed in what's considered to be the first professional Vale Tudo fight in history. At only 135 pounds, Hélio went up against Fred Ebert, the 205-pound second-place finisher in that year's World Freestyle Wrestling Championship. The match lasted a lot longer than 30 seconds. At 2 a.m., after more than 2 hours, Hélio and Ebert were still at it. Since no public event was allowed to go past 2 a.m., the police stopped the fight and it was called a draw. The fans rioted, the Gracies had made an impression.
Arrebentei com o sujeito, com 18 anos de idade. Aí fiquei famoso.
Foi muito bom pro jiu-jitsu, porque foi a forma do jiu-jitsu demonstrar, né, a sua eficiência através. Porque se fizesse um cara forte, não, o cara não é jiu-jitsu, é porque o cara é forte mesmo, naturalmente, então, não, um cara fraco, né, fisicamente, né, e fazendo coisas extraordinárias, né, deu uma credibilidade, né, ao jiu-jitsu, né, e ficou provado que o conhecimento técnico prevalecia, né.
The Gracies' new status was great for attracting students. It also helped when 22-year-old Helio took the challenge a bit too far. In 1935, he was arrested for fighting in the streets with a luta livre wrestler. But before he was sent to prison, he was partnered with Brazil's president, Getúlio Vargas, whose son trained with the Gracies. But just when it seemed they couldn't lose, Carlos experienced a setback that would drastically change him. His wife, Carmen, pregnant at the time, was diagnosed with tuberculosis. She died at the age of 27 after the birth of their daughter, Sandra, who contracted the disease from her mother. Now a widower with 5 children, Carlos left Rio for the state of Ceará, hoping the drier climate will save Sandra.
Ele fez dele um laboratório. Ele criou uma forma de aprimorar a saúde dele, não ser surpreendido por uma doença incidental. Vou lutar amanhã, que gripe, que não sei o quê, quer dizer, não vou deixar de lutar. Isso era um código de honra, né? E não tem nada que justifique você não aparecer na arena.
After discovering what seemed to be the final youth, Carlos moved back to Rio and continued to focus on the strength of his family. But now it wasn't only bodily strength he was concerned with. It was strength in numbers.
They believe in the concept of multiplying. One time a writer wrote that my grandfather didn't build a family, he built an army.
He didn't believe in sex just for pleasure. He believed in sex, procreation. You're like a rabbit. It's like you want to spread, create a big family.
Carlos chose the name for almost all those kids, because he believes in this letter is positive and that is not positive.
He really thought that the letter R gave us a lot of power in our name. In Brazil, it has the sound of H. So my name is Renzo, not Renzo like they say here. So it was like a strong letter that would add personality to you, would add strength to you. And basically like 98% of my family has the name starting with the letter R.
Ultimately, Carlos had 21 children. He was 75 years old at the birth of his last child. Things were very different for Helio. By 1950, he and his wife Margarita had been unable to conceive. So Carlos decided he would give them one of his own. Carlos, now 48, was married to his second wife Jenny when his child Claudia was born. Carlos named the boy Hollis and decided he would be raised by Helio.
I was 18 and I want to keep my son, but I want him to be in a family. That's why I opened my hands to Helio, because I didn't want him to be excluded. I want him to be with the whole Grace clan,
E me locupletei nos filhos do meu irmão. Ele me premiou, que aquilo me locupletou durante muitos anos por eu não ter filhos.
But still desperate for a son of his own, Helio made another unusual arrangement. Since his wife Margarita couldn't have children, they agreed that Hollis' babysitter, Isabel, would have them for her. A year after Helio took Hollis, he and Isabel had a child. After consulting with Carlos, they named the boy Horion. Helio began teaching Hollis and Horion jiu-jitsu before they could walk. As with Carlos' older sons before them, it became as natural as breathing.
ele morava na casa do tio Hélio. Com o crescimento do Rory, começaram os dois a ficarem assim, numa idadezinha já mais competitiva, que criança compete, o Rory começou a impor a sua personalidade. Eu acho que o tio Hélio começou a notar isso, de querer levantar e fortalecer a personalidade do Rory. Isso criou uma certa rivalidade discreta, mas entre Rollins e Hoyer.
The rivalry between Hollis and Hoyer was both positive and tragic. It would ultimately result in some of the most significant race achievements, and it would bring them worldwide recognition. But it would also be responsible for the family's most devastating upheavals. By early 1950s, Helio was unbeatable and wanted to take on the world. In 1951, he publicly challenged Joe Louis, the American boxing champion. Louis' manager sent a polite letter of refusal.
E todos queriam fazer dormir. Até que aquele Park Shimbun, o jornal japonês, solicitou do Japão mandar gente para ele ganhar. Aí veio o Kimura e o Kato. O Kimura, quando diz, com você que você é muito leve. Mas o Kato vai lutar e vai fazer a mesma coisa que eu.
Tinha lutado a primeira vez aqui no Maracanã, deu empate e fizeram a revanche lá.
Helio's fights with Kato were judged according to jiu-jitsu rules, as opposed to Vale Tudo. The first fight was a draw because neither opponent had submitted by the end of the third round. By the rematch, both fighters felt the need for victory.
O inglês achou estrangulamento, o japonês naturalmente não quis bater, né? Aquela coisa toda, aquele brilho, né? Do samurai, aquela coisa aí. Acabou apagando. O próprio Kimura mesmo subiu ao ringue e ficou louco, falou, vou lutar, esse brasileiro aí tal, eu vou vencer em menos de 3 minutos. Mostrar que no jiu-jitsu japonês não tem adversário imbatível e tudo mais.
He was so sure that he was gonna beat Helio that he said, if the fight goes longer than 3 minutes, you can consider yourself the winner.
Helio fought hundreds of fights, both inside and outside of the ring, and beat opponents who win far more than he did. His match against Masahiko Kimura would be his most difficult yet. Kimura was Japan's national champion. He trained as much as 9 hours a day, using tree trunks for leg locks, since no sparring partner could withstand him.
How you say in English? Psyching the person up? That's what my grandfather used to do to Helios. Like, he used to be real good in psyching people up. Like, he used to psych Helio up for his fights. He was very responsible for giving Helio some power, some like mental power to go there.
Around 60,000 fans attended the match, including President Vargas. The Brazilian fans were not above a little intimidation to even the playing field. In Kimura's account of the fight, when he entered the stadium, there was an empty coffin waiting for him in the ring. As he walked towards it, the audience pelted him with raw eggs.
Kimura was so much heavier. It was like something like 50 pounds. It was so much heavier that Hélio was getting tired.
Hélio made it through the first 10-minute round. Early in the second, Kimura pinned Hélio and tried to suffocate him with his body. Kimura said Hélio was shaking his head, attempting to breathe. Hélio tried to push Kimura up with his left arm, but Kimura grabbed and put in a lock. As he twisted the arm, he expected Hélio to surrender, but he refused to tap the mat. Hélio's arm was close to breaking point. According to the rules, Kimura had to make Hélio submit. So he twisted harder. The bone broke, but Hélio still wouldn't tap.
Como eu não gostava de bater, ele não achava que eu não bateria, ele jogou a toalha. Ele já ganhou a luta, mas não me venceu. Essa foi a derrota que eu tive.
Hélio was 37 years old at the time of his defeat. The arm lock he used to beat him is still known today as the Kimura. While Hélio considered the match a moral victory, it was a harsh reminder that he wasn't going to be able to defend the Gracie name forever. Hélio retired from fighting to spend more time teaching classes and training the family's next generation. After the media attention from the Japanese matches in 1951, more and more people in Rio were interested in jiu-jitsu, and the Gracie Academy was extremely popular. They moved to a giant new academy at Rio Branco Avenue, where they were teaching more than 600 students a month. The locker room became a who's who of Brazilian politics and high society.
Inclusive, meu pai costuma contar muito, a falar muito que os grandes negócios do Brasil passaram pela Academia Gracie na época, na década de 50, 60.
Ele jamais podia falhar. Ele estava sempre preocupado para, de forma alguma, cometer um erro. Né? Porque muita gente dependia dele. Meu pai fazia a pessoa acreditar que ele ia conseguir. Esse era o maior valor dele e isso eu acho que não tem preço. Ele tinha uma força mental sem ser autoritário. Ele nunca foi autoritário, obrigou. Ele mostrava o caminho certo e cada um faz o que quer. E nem por isso a pessoa fazendo ou não, ele vai deixar de gostar da pessoa ou não.
Hélio's style was the opposite. He was known for being very tough and strict.
It was like kind of like a Nazi, not like a Nazi, but it was like a Nazi regime. You couldn't get out of line. Used to like gather people around. Okay, we're having a meeting. And used to be in the middle, everybody around him, like talking about it. And all of a sudden, he used to kick somebody, in the groin, and you had to defend. Or sometimes slap somebody in the face, and you're like, whoa, yeah, pay attention, stuff like that. Used to try to keep everyone in the leash, so I guess someone then started, I can go on my own, get out of here.
Valdemar Santana was one instructor who had enough. Valdemar left the Gracie Academy to start teaching on his own. In May of 1955, Hélio decided to come out of retirement and settle the score in a Vale Tudo match.
Ele treinou muito tempo na Academia Gracie, o Valdemar. Treinou uns 4, 5 anos, né? Muita gente achava, pra que lutar com o Valdemar? Mas no caso, lutar que é mais novo aí, garotão, vai dizer que estava com 42 anos, entendeu? E não estava em forma assim, entendeu? O povão, quando soube do lance, porque o negócio tem ido para as rádios, né? Pensando forçar, dar aquele tapume de madeira, aí derrubaram aquilo ali, daí invadiram as dependências lá do ginásio lá. Aí não teve como tirar o pessoal de lá. Entrou, tá lá, ficou aquilo lotado, não teve nem se mexer. O Valdemar, como era mais novo, né? Tinha aquela explosão, ele entrava muito naquela baiana, né? O Hélio Gracie bem mais leve, derrubava, aí ficava na guarda do Hélio Gracie. E procurando sempre manter a luta na borda do ringue ali, porque qualquer coisa ali escapulia para fora, entendeu? E a luta se prolongou. Essa luta durou 3 horas e 45 minutos. Eu lembro que começou às 5 da tarde, terminou 15 para as 9. E também não estava esperando aquele resultado, né?
With a final kick to Hélio's head, the fight was over and Valdemar won the longest Vale Tudo match in history. Hélio will never fight again. The membership at the Gracies Academy dwindled, while Valdemar's increased. The Gracies needed a new generation to step up.
Porque eu detesto mutuca. Você sabe o que é mutuca, né? O pessoal do jiu-jitsu sabe o que é mutuca. Mutuca é frouxo, covarde. Então, isso eu não suporto.
Carlson and Valdemar Santana had been friends and trained together at the Gracie Academy, so it seemed natural that he'd be called on to defend their family's honor against their new rival. But Carlos' first son had a rebel spirit.
Sabia que tinha que treinar, que se preparar, mas confiava muito no pique dele e tal, depois, e às vezes isso trazia problemas, né?
Realmente era muito difícil me tirar do sério, porque eu era super calmo. E então era realmente difícil. Eu, inclusive, antes das lutas, eu costumava dormir no vestiário. Faltando assim, tipo 1 hora antes da luta, eu dormia lá, tranquilo. E o papai me acordava, papai, Carlson, tá na hora de acordar, acorda, tá na hora da luta. Aí eu acordava e ia lutar.
Carlos didn't have many options within the family. The next son in line, Robson, wasn't a realistic alternative.
O Robson, que aliás era um grande lutador, era um fenômeno, mas o Robson era muito levezinho, pesava 59 quilos só, então eu acho que ele não teria condições de lutar contra os mastodontes. E então não tinha ninguém para lutar, era eu o único, que era eu, o Robson e um monte de mulheres atrás.
So to get Carlson worked up, Carlos threatened to put another student, João Alberto, up against Valdemar. This finally motivated Carlson to train harder. The fight took place in October 1955. No one gave up, and the match ended up in a draw. 1 year after Hélio's fight, Carlson and Valdemar met again.
It was a big deal. You should have seen that. That was incredible. That's all it matters in Rio de Janeiro was the fight. You know, it was everywhere.
Valdemar pretty bad, like very bad. That Valdemar, they throw the towel. You know?
After Carlson's victory over Valdemar Santana, he became a celebrity in Rio, and everyone wanted to train with him. The Gracie Academy was back on the map. Brazil was beginning to take notice of Carlson. The world was beginning to take notice of Brazil. The ultramodern city of Brasilia became the capital in 1960 and ushered in a time of hope and confidence in the country's future. Pelé, Carmen Miranda, and Bossa Nova had been exported all over the world, and the economy was doing well. But Carlson didn't keep track of how much money he was earning. His celebrity status and lack of discipline created serious tensions between him and Hélio.
My uncle Hélio was very vain, very, like to be, people licking his boots and things like that. And my father was kind of, pulling him back. Hey, You're just a human being, And so he didn't deal very well. He was very jealous of Carlos, trying to put him down, and complain.
And in Brazil, an even greater struggle for control was taking place. In 1964, the Brazilian military took over the country. What started as an attempt to rein in communism became an authoritarian regime. In 1968, the military dictatorship passed Institutional Act No. 5, closing Congress and outlawing any criticism against any member of the armed forces. Censorship, torture, and death squads were utilized to enforce it. The Gracies, who had been training military commanders for years, continued to thrive under the military government. But Carlson finally rebelled against Hélio's authority. In what would be the first outward display of family division, he left the academy and started his own gym in Copacabana.
E isso criou uma certa rivalidade dentro da família, porque o Carlson era um cara importante, que tinha uma escola importante, tinha um peso importante. É como tivesse acontecido que dois generais estivessem fazendo uma guerra civil. Tanto que eu cresci a minha vida toda lutando contra os alunos do Carlson, olhando o Carlson como um rival. E esse era meu irmão.
Carlson's jiu-jitsu was evolving as well. He broke from Hélio's idea that strength didn't matter. Carlson emphasized the need for endurance, and his students were considered tough fighters. For the first time, Gracie schools were competing against each other.
Olha, minha reação com o resto da família é ótima. Eu só brigo com eles na parte esportiva, entendeu? Parte de esportes. Por exemplo, tem um campeonato, todas as academias entram, cada um tem uma academia. Você vai querer ganhar. Então, só porque o cara é Gracie, eu vou dizer pro meu aluno, olha, você perde para ele que ele é Gracie. O professor seria eu. Na parte esportiva, realmente, eles são rivais. Mas eu jamais prepararia um aluno meu para fazer, por exemplo, um vale tudo, uma briga assim de porrada com o Gracie. Eu jamais faria isso.
But sometimes the line between fighting and competition got blurry. This fight, which took place in the 90s, is a good example. Carlos' grandson Ryan in the lighter trunks and Carlson's student Tito on the darker trunks had fallen out. The family arranged this match so the two could work out their differences.
Nós somos educadíssimos, somos gentis, só não pode apurrinhar, só não pode pisar no carro, só não pode querer tripudiar. Fatalmente vai ter conflito.
Mete a mão lá pro baixo, dá uma, esse ponte que vai. Porra, minha orelha. Papai. Isso aí, restura, vocês agora aí. Abre pra câmera. Vai. Vamos ver esse sangue, compadre. É isso. Defende a vai. Chico, vamos correr desse lado. Já corre de cima dele. Vamos lá, cara. Vai por cima dele. Calma, descansa. Tecnicamente. Entendeu? Chegou perto, chuta no saco também. Aí de lado dele, fica de boa aí. Vai.
I tried to train with Carlson, but he was so close-minded in the sense of like, no, if you train with Hollis, you can't train with me. Because they used to share the academy. Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays was Hollis. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday was Carlson. Like when I told Hollis that I want to train with Bolt, Hollis said, no problem, just go ahead. When I told Carlson said, you have to choose. Or you train here or you train there. You can't train on both. So I said, just for the fact that his way of thinking, I just left. I never came back.
As the 60s drew to a close, one family member in particular would help to invigorate the Gracies, and by reaching out to the rest of the world, would finally bring their jiu-jitsu to the next level. The son of Carlos, raised by Hélio, was destined to have a special place in the family. And because his birth mother had moved to New York in the 60s, Hollis had something the other Gracies didn't: the opportunity to travel. Claudia's job with Lufthansa Airlines made it possible for Hollis to visit her often, and he spent his formative years traveling the world with her.
Hollis was more like a free spirit who liked to learn a lot. Like he loved the museums. He learned to speak English well. He could speak English well. He loved culture. He believed the world was a small place. That's why he was always helping other family relatives to travel.
From a very early age, the family recognized Hollis had an innate talent for jiu-jitsu. On top of that, sibling rivalry gave me extra motivation.
O Hollis era uma coisa natural, ele era um lutador natural. Por ele ser o melhor, por ele estar melhor, ele sentia que o tio Hélio sempre puxava essa gente para embora. Então eu acho que aquilo ele queria talvez provar para o tio Hélio que ele era o melhor, que ele ia ser imbatível. Então aquilo puxou por ele ir treinando cada vez mais fundo, e se aperfeiçoando, e porra, só pensar em treinar e ser o melhor.
Hollis was always the one that was more ahead of everything than Horio, and probably that made Uncle Hélio very resentful.
O Horio estagnou no que o tio Hélio ensinou. E o tio Hélio convenceu ele que ele não precisa saber mais de nada, que aquilo ali era tudo que ele precisava.
In 1973, Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon was a worldwide phenomenon. Kung Fu and karate became more popular than ever. In Rio, a karate instructor made a public claim that his style would beat anyone's, even the Gracies. Hollis decided to prove him wrong and set up a competition between the schools.
If you take Hélio's Jiu-Jitsu and you compare to Hollis' Jiu-Jitsu, it's like an old car and a new car now. He started putting all the attacks together, all the combinations, all the setups. That's why Jiu-Jitsu is so much aggressive nowadays, because of Hollis.
Eu acho que ele estava 30 anos na frente do resto do jiu-jitsu.
Aprendeu aquilo, mas não ficou naquela lavagem. Você lembrava de que, meu irmão, você não precisa aprender mais nada. O que você aprendeu é o suficiente, você é o melhor. Não, ele foi buscar mais.
So Hollis competed in everything: judo, wrestling, and sambo, a Russian version of jiu-jitsu, more focused in leg locks. In 1978, an American wrestling coach from California named Bobby Anderson came to Brazil to help develop a wrestling program. Hollis asked Bob to teach some wrestling lessons at the Race Academy.
Aí, quando acabou daí, o Bob Anderson teve a curiosidade, mas agora eu queria ver como é que é o jiu-jitsu de vocês aí. Como é que funciona e tal. Aí, assim, então vamos fazer uma movimentação. Falou pro Bob Anderson, você procura me finalizar, me pegar no golpe que você quiser, procura me fazer bater. Aí o Bob Anderson foi batendo uma atrás da outra ali, umas 6 vezes. Então, ele até deu soco no tatame, falou, it's impossible! Bateu, entendeu? Aí, poxa, o Hollis começou a mostrar, isso funciona assim, você mostra as posições, aquela coisa, poxa, o negócio é extraordinário, isso é um xadrez, é uma ciência, é uma coisa. Aí ficou fã do Hollis.
Bob and Hollis became good friends and traveled all over Brazil, putting on clinics and demonstrations. As they trained together, they exchanged information and even came up with new moves. like Anderson's Turkey Bar, an arm lock in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu known as the Americana.
The Brazilians back then, they had just started wrestling in 77 or 78. So like in a year, they were able to qualify to go for the Pan American in Mexico, you know? It was the first time a Brazilian delegation of our wrestling left Brazil. And Hollis and my father were the captain of the whole boat, you know? And they had an unbelievable experience. And I believe it resulted in what we have today, which is Brazilian Gracies in America, teaching here, teaching everywhere, competing everywhere, you know. But I believe everything started with Hollis. Like Hollis was the first one to start organizing the whole thing and getting everybody out of the country. And he believed we could take over the world, like in terms of martial arts. And he wasn't wrong.
By the late 70s, the family was enormous. Carlos had 21 children, Helio had 9, and a third generation was starting now. It was a great time for the Gracies. The up-and-coming generations of Gracie men were all influenced by Hollis, and they went out of their way to train with him.
O Rod foi realmente o meu ídolo na época, o meu mestre, né? E eu sentia que ele tinha carinho muito grande por mim também.
He was a very good instructor, very tough guy, tough, I mean, good fighter, and very good with us when we were kids. We really looked forward to go to his class.
It was hard to be around him without being amazed by his charisma and his way of leadership. Like he was a leader. It was easy to be near him and to feel secure.
Ó, tem outro uau lá em cima também. Você quer andar no...
Eu também quero andar no cavalo.
É mesmo? Vou filmar aqui o Igor.
Tô filmando vocês três.
Igão, dá um beijo, papai. Dá, Igor. Dá um beijão. Beijo, beijo. Menino, dá beijo, papai. Menino. Pra Cacá? Quer dar um pra Cacá? Quer? Então vou pegar um pra Cacá pra gente passear, tá? Tá bom? Mano.
Hollis was like an umbrella that would cover everybody, they would embrace everybody. But at the same time, there was those who didn't like to be covered by his umbrella. They want the sun to shine on their head too, you know? Which is okay, and I bet he thought the same.
O Horion não conseguia satisfazer aquilo que o Chuel esperava dele como lutador.
I believe Horion left the country because of that, because the pressure of Chuel on him to win something. And he was not able to, you know, what can he do?
In 1978, the same year that Hollis became the Brazilian wrestling champion, Horion moved to the U.S. To support himself, he worked construction and cleaned houses, all the while planning a way to bring the Gracie Challenge to California. Back in Rio, the family's notoriety, combined with the lack of organized events, made the Gracies walking targets for any fighter looking to prove himself on the streets. And if a younger Gracie was challenged, it meant Hollis would be backing him up.
Hollis was like really defending the family, no matter who he was. That's one of the main reasons he used to bring the family together, is because he, like, if someone did something to his cousin, which is, even if he knew a little bit, but he used to go there and like, oh, we're gonna kick this guy's ass.
One of there's a story that really marked a time in Jiu-Jitsu. We had huge fights against the Luta Livre guys.
A student of Flavio Molina actually tapped my cousin on the shoulder, and then when he turned, he hit him.
The guy sucker punched him and knocked him out. And he spat on my brother and said to him, "This is because you're Gracie." So on that day, this guy was actually like 5 or 6 years older than my brother Charles. So on that day, Charles called Hollis, and his whole school went to the guy's school.
Was your student hit my nephew on the face, and I'm here to beat him up. So Flavio Molinos is standing in front of him. He goes, Flavio, if you don't get out of the way, I'm gonna beat you up.
And was one of the famous fights ever. Like everybody that was inside that school get their butt kicked. Every single one.
That's what actually started the rivalry between luta livre and jiu-jitsu. Then you see Rickson fighting Hugo on the beach. Actually started all with Hollis, and then it was because of that.
So even though he was very friendly, very sweet, when the message had to be sent, he would deliver well.
O Hollis foi o melhor disparado em todas as áreas. O Hollis era o papai com mais possibilidades. Tudo aquilo que pudesse meter medo a ele queria enfrentar, para provar que ele não tinha medo de nada. E quando ele começou a surfar, ele via aquelas pessoas descendo ondas gigantescas, e ele achava que se aquele cara desce aquela onda, eu vou descer também. E na asa delta, a mesma coisa. Às vezes o tempo estava um tempo ruim, ele achava que ninguém ia pular porque estava com medo, e ele se aventurava a pular, quase volta e meia aconteceu um acidente com ele. Até que aconteceu um acidente fatal. Eu acho que ele foi, às vezes, ele perdeu um pouco o discernimento entre o medo e a imprudência.
What a loss. See someone like him die so early, you know? He was the best on the family back then, on his time. He died on his prime.
Hollis died on June 6 of 1982. At the age of 31, in a hang gliding accident in the mountains. More than 500 people attended his funeral. Carlos and Hélio did not.
So after he died, it's kind of a lot of people went on their ways, you know. Some of his students even stopped doing jiu-jitsu.
After Hollis' death, Carlos Jr., known as Carlinhos, took over his academy, eventually renamed it Gracie Barra, after the neighborhood he moved to, and he started to organize jiu-jitsu. he got the first large sponsorship deals to encourage more competitions and create the national organizing body called the Jiu-Jitsu Confederation. But Hélio hated these changes, especially the idea of point system for competitions.
Ficou sendo jiu-jitsu, vamos dizer, programado e difundido pelo Carlinhos Gracie Jr., que não é mesmo o meu jiu-jitsu. É um jiu-jitsu de competição, e jiu-jitsu de competição não é arte marcial. O jiu-jitsu que eu criei é uma arte marcial para você não brigar na rua e não apanhar de ninguém.
Every sport needs an organization. It's very important to help the sport grow, to help organize competitions in terms of bringing new athletes up. A fighter who establishes himself through amateur competitions, he has a much longer career. You're gonna see much better fighters when they come from this environment.
Na vida não se pode estagnar em nada, você tem que estar sempre aprendendo, estar sempre modificando. Então, se os outros não se conscientizarem disso e abrirem a cabeça e abrirem o seu jogo, vão ficar sempre para trás como estão.
Arguments over the past and future of Jiu-Jitsu were dividing the Gracies in two opposing sides, and their most talented fighter yet would be caught in the crossfire. The third son of Hélio and Isabel, Rickson Gracie, came of age in the 70s, and he was heavily influenced by both Rorion and Hollis.
Aqui vemos o poderoso Rickson degustando seu café da manhã. Apenas umas 60 manguinhas só.
Minha sorte é que ao invés de você estar comendo, você está filmando.
E depois que o Rickson começou a ter mais contato com o Hollis, começou a treinar mais com o Hollis, pode dar aula para ele, começou a melhorar muito. O Rickson acho que ele deu uma alavancada muito grande no jiu-jitsu dele, depois que o Hollis começou a dar uma orientação para ele.
Bota o kimono.
At age 21, Hélio put him against Casimiro Nascimento Martins, a real brawler known as King Zulu.
O Zulu já era um lutador já calejado, né? Bastante estrada, né? Então, muita gente estava achando uma temeridade. Pô, por que não bota o Holly, não sei o que e tal? Não, vamos botar o Rickson mesmo, que é para ele... Mesmo que ele leve os cascudos lá, não tem problema. Vai fazer parte do adestramento.
With Hélio and Hollis in his corner, Rickson fought what he still considers his toughest fight ever, and defeated Zulu in the second round with a rear choke. The rematch took place 3 years after the first fight, in the same stadium where Hélio used to fight and where Carlson fought Valdemar.
To me, there's no other feeling like the one that you have when you step up to fight someone, to measure yourself against somebody else who is stronger than you, looks prouder than you, even looks at you down like he's mocking you. And once you engage in a combat with him and you fight him and you dominate him, and through the fight you feel his will leaving his body, and you start dominating the fight, the next thing you see the fear on his eyes.
In the first match, Zulu threw Rickson out of the ring 4 times to avoid defeat before Rickson got him to submit. In the rematch, Zulu was more prepared for Rickson's game.
is the two gonna win, and you see him after, completely dominated, and you are the one who has to look at him. Normally I look with passion, you know, but I could look him as I wish because I fully dominated him. So there's no other feeling like being a fighter and be able to achieve that, to really measure yourself against another man and walk out victorious, you know?
But because of bad timing and struggles within the family, Rickson's power and technique would be hidden for the rest of the world until many years later. In 1985, the military dictatorship finally came to an end, and free elections were held, signaling a new era in Brazil. But stability wasn't part of it. The economy was in trouble, and a weakened military left a power vacuum in the country. Brazil's cities became notorious for poverty, slums, and violence. Many Gracies began to look at the U.S. as an option, one that was clearly working for Rorion. To classic Hollywood networking, he went from cleaning the house of an assistant director for the TV show Starsky and Hutch to becoming an extra on the series. From there, he made more connections, becoming a fight choreographer for the first Lethal Weapon movie in 1986, teaching Mel Gibson the triangle choke for the final fight scene. 2 years after that, he was hired to train Chuck Norris in Jiu-Jitsu for a movie called The Hero and the Terror. Norris, especially in karate, was impressed by Rorion, and with the help of many other Gracie fighters, they put on a seminar. Encouraged by what he saw in the US, Rickson moved to California in 1989 and started teaching at Rorion's new academy in Torrance, joining his younger brother Royce, who had been instructor there since 1982.
Que o filho da puta do irmão dele, aquele pilantra, não deixava ele... Fez ele assinar um contrato, e logo quando ele veio pra cá ele não sabia ler inglês. Então, porra, o que é que eu falo? Se meu irmão dá qualquer porra, eu assino sem ver nada, tá aqui que eu assino. Então ele pegou e deu pra ele assinar um documento pra que ele só podia lutar se o meu irmão autorizasse, autorizando. Então ele não sabia que ela botou. Então, tipo, por isso que ele sempre lutou no Japão, ele nunca pôde lutar nos Estados Unidos. Porque o Rorion também tomava 70% da bolsa.
Rorion, who had gone to law school, used his business acumen to spread the word about jiu-jitsu and protect it from competition. In 1989, he obtained a trademark for the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu name and for the triangle logo the family has been using in Brazil for years. But much for the surprise of other Gracies, he made sure they couldn't use the name or the logo. Soon after that, Rickson disappeared from Rorion's academy and opened his own gym.
O Rorion é o mais pilantra da família. Quando o Rickson quis ir embora, ele botou o Rickson pra fora e não queria deixar o Rickson dar aula. O Rickson não podia dar aula com o nome Gracie. Só que ele botou na academia dele, uma época só Rickson, não dava Gracie. Se tem o nome Gracie, você tem o direito de usar. Quem é Gracie tem o direito de usar o nome Gracie.
Eu, no lugar dele, não teria feito algumas coisas que ele fez que eu prefiro não comentar agora, mas eu acho que ele poderia ter usado a família de um jeito diferente.
In 1993, Rorion devised the North American equivalent of the Gracie Challenge, but in a much larger scale. Originally called the King of the Beach, the Woodman Fighting Championship was designed to prove to the world what the Gracies already had proven in Brazil. Rorion's business partners in UFC 1 was Art Davie. Art found the location for the fight in Denver, Colorado, a place with no boxing laws. He was also responsible for fighting the fighters, a job which was more difficult than he expected. No one knew whether the event was legal, as nothing like it had ever taken place in the US before. Chuck Norris refused a ringside invitation for fear of backlash. But one of Rorion's biggest decisions was which Gracie to use in the challenge. The obvious choice was Rickson, the family's strongest and most technical fighter, or Renzo, younger but with a proven record in Brazil. Instead, Rorion chose his little brother Royce, a controversial move that would alienate even more Rickson.
Rorion gave that to Royce, which was the guy who was more controllable by Rorion. So Rorion could control Royce better. He didn't trust Rickson. He knew Rickson was gonna go on his own soon. So I believe he would rather invest, make Royce bigger than actually Rickson. But Rickson was always the better fighter.
Look at that. Isn't it incredible? Right for the takedown.
Big judge right away.
Royce goes Royce. He looks like he's going for the back.
Oh, the kid's back up.
Royce, there's the tap. There's the tap.
Royce Gracie was born to Eddie and his second wife, Vera, in 1966. As a child, he trained with the powerhouses, Hollis, Rickson, Carlinhos, and Helio. He moved to the US at the age of 17 to live with his brother Rorion. By the time of UFC 1, he was 26 years old, and his 51-1 record consisted mostly of unofficial fights held at Rorion's academy. While it was clearly a risky decision, choosing Royce paid off for Rorion in a big way.
Was actually to see what martial arts was the best. And Royce was actually, beating everybody and was just a regular guy, like no physical condition. He didn't have an athletic aspect of, like you can look at a guy and say, this guy's an athlete. No, you look at him, you say, no, this is an ordinary guy that, goes to work, he's a lawyer, or, it's just an ordinary guy that doesn't have, he doesn't run every day, he doesn't do this, lift weights every day, So that's what was very impressive, because opened the eyes of the American people, not only the American people all over the world, that for you to defend yourself on a street fight, you don't need to be big.
Jiu-Jitsu get an exposure they never had before. Suddenly became a word known. And everybody that knew Jiu-Jitsu well became a celebrity right away. Like became a star.
Então, Royce tem uma responsabilidade enorme, entendeu? Abriu caminho para milhares de pessoas aí que estão empregadas aí, entendeu? É isso que eu vejo.
UFC 1 changed the fighting world. In the course of the next year, Rorion and his partners would organize 4 more UFC, capitalizing on Royce's new star power. But at the same time the family business was taking off as never before, the family itself was more disjointed than ever.
The side of my Uncle Helio tried to take over in the sense of running the Jiu-Jitsu and even trying to change a little the history of how everything came around.
Existe na nossa família, está havendo um negócio que eu acho lamentável, é que está havendo uma certa divisão política, entendeu? Em torno entre Carlos Gracie e Hélio Gracie, entendeu? E o que acontece é o seguinte, os dois juntos é que fizeram tudo, entendeu? Que projetaram, é que deram estrutura a tudo que acontece hoje aí. E se os dois caminhassem separadamente, não aconteceria nada, porque um foi necessário ao outro.
If 1993 was the years of Gracie's greatest triumph, 1994 was the years of greatest conflict.
What a performance by Gracie!
That year, Carlos died of the age of 92. His dream of spreading the gospel of Jiu-Jitsu throughout the world had come true. But as the commercial stakes went up, his principles of peaceful leadership fell by the wayside. In 1994, Carlos' son Carley sued Rorion of his trademark of the Gracie name and logo. Carley felt that the other 38 fighters and instructors in the family had the right to use their family name in association with their academy. Rorion countersued, claiming Carley infringed on his business by using the name and logo. The case Gracie versus Gracie split the family and created a lot of animosity against Rorion.
He thought that he could own Jiu-Jitsu, like he thought that Jiu-Jitsu belonged to him. The selfishness that he had didn't allow him to see the brotherhood that he could have helped so many Gracies to achieve and to think in the same way and make it stronger. He didn't have that vision. Like, he had everything in the hand to help everybody, to be with us, and he just played the ball by himself. What he didn't realize, it's very hard to play ball by yourself, especially if you're playing against the whole team on the other side.
In 1997, the case between Carlet and Horan was tried before a jury.
And so the jury came to the conclusion that, yes, you could use the name Gracie Jiu-Jitsu.
The jury decided that Horan did not have a valid trademark for the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu name, but it agreed that Carlet willfully infringed the triangle logo and awarded Horan $108,000 in damages, as well as more than $620,000 in attorney fees.
O que adianta eu nascer com o nome Gracie e não agir de acordo com a filosofia certa? Eu acho que não tem cabimento.
Rickson, who felt the only way to settle family dispute was in private, dealt with the tension by turning inward. He became focused and strengthened his body and mind.
He's into yoga, shiatsu, training, working out. Very spiritualist guy. He was one of the main reasons Jiu-Jitsu spread out in Japan.
Representing Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, current freestyle fighting champion of the world, Rickson Gracie.
8 months after Royce's victory in Denver, while he and Horan were still involved in upcoming Ultimate shows, Rickson agreed to fight in the Vale Tudo Japan Open in 1994, Japan's answer to UFC. He won the tournament and competed in the next year's event as well. In 1997, as political pressure in the US was forcing the UFC off cable television toward bankruptcy, a new organization called Pride Fighting Championship set up shop in Japan. His first event was specially designed to put Rickson against the Japanese celebrity pro wrestler Nobuhiko Dakara.
Oh, here we go. We're on the ground. Takada is not giving up the takedown. Takada with a knee. Back position. Beautiful, tight, double takedown body slam. Rickson did it. Rickson's got the mount, boss. It's a matter of time.
Oh, here we go. He's going to go for armbar.
There it is.
There we go.
Oh, he's got it. He's got it. Takada's got the hands locked. Takada taps out.
More than 47,000 screaming fans watched Rickson defeat their hero. He became a celebrity in Japan. Toys were made in his likeness. And he finally gained worldwide recognition. Pride FC became a widely successful venue for what now is being called the mixed martial arts.
Hoje em dia todo mundo faz karatê, mas faz jiu-jitsu. Todo mundo faz boxe tailandês, mas faz jiu-jitsu, entendeu?
So the only way that jiu-jitsu can lose if he's fighting another guy who knows jiu-jitsu well and is stronger than him. That's the reality.
Of the new generation, one Gracie in particular seemed to stand out as a unifier.
For the first time that I could formulate a thought of what I want to be, I saw myself as a fighter. I saw myself fighting in specific no rules, like fighting mixed martial art events.
Renzo Gracie was born in 1967, the son of Hobson and grandson of Carlos. He started competing in jiu-jitsu and judo tournaments by the age of 7. When he was 11 years old, his family moved to the Barra neighborhood of Rio. On the beach, he became heavily involved in surfing. He was known for being a happy, fun-loving kid, but he was also small. And like his grandfather Carlos, Renzo was quick to prove that he was a fierce fighter in spite of his size.
I was so skinny, people never believed that I could fight. And I used to fight sometimes 3 or 4 times in one day. You know, after you beat him up, you guys shake hands and normally go drink a juice together. You know?
You will never take shit from nobody. Never let it pass. Always fight back.
It was one of the most intense part of my life was while I was surfing.
O Renzo chegava na praia, tinha o quebra-mar, chegava com a bandeira do pirata, caveira, botava na ponta da porra do quebra-mar e falava, ó, quem eu conheço, pra lá da bandeira. Quem eu não conheço, pro outro lado, meu irmão.
Era incompatibilidade de gênios, entendeu? O pessoal lá de baixo não batia muito com o pessoal daqui de cima, entendeu? Então tinha esse problema de incompatibilidade. Então o Renzo era, vamos dizer assim, o mediador, né? Era o diplomata, que ele era um cara bem assim, incisivo e assim, bem, como é que eu vou te falar? O pessoal entendia bem a linguagem dele quando ele queria se expressar.
Então na época ele era mais novo, ele ficou com fama de que era brigão e tudo, mas na verdade ele comprava a briga da gente, né? Tava sempre à frente das coisas com a gente aqui.
Like I don't attack nobody. I'm not rude to nobody. I try to always give a smile to anybody who comes talk to me, you know. So in the moment that someone gets aggressive towards us, don't expect our reaction to be like an altruistic one. You're gonna see the thing get ugly.
When he was 17, his parents split up and moved out of their house. Renzo became a father figure for his younger brothers, Ralph and Ryan. With their parents gone, they turned their living room into a dojo, and the house became a magnet for the tough guys in the neighborhood.
It was a crazy house. Like the door never locked. We lost the key right on the first week. So the house was always door open. Anybody could come in and out at any time they pleased.
Então aquilo era uma espécie de república. Teve gente que foi para lá passar um fim de semana, que ficou 10 anos.
Every crazy guy in the neighborhood would end up there. You know, like, and we made a fighters out of them all. Like every single one that came to live with us, we helped them to train, we took them out of drugs, we put them in our academy, you know, like, it was like the guy get another chance in life. And most of them succeed. They have schools today, they own their own business, and they're doing well for themselves. Some of them, they are here in America, some are in Brazil.
Agora com cara do seu peso, não foi covarde, foi porra, irmão. A próxima vez, não, vai falar agora disso. Próxima vez, quando tiver uma confusão, não, ou tu procura alguém do teu peso, ou vamos da tua graduação. Pelo menos agora que eu estou com cara do teu livro.
Leva lá no hospital para dar uns pontos aí. Pode ser.
Aí aqui, merda, vai dar polícia essa porra. Merda, polícia na porrada.
Precisa falar comigo no chat bem semana, acontece social. Valeu.
While Renzo's younger years were dominated by street fights to prove himself and protect his friends, he gradually gained more contact with the rest of the Gracies by training at Holly's Academy in Copacabana. After Holly's died, Renzo began to train with Carlinhos, who eventually gave him his black belt.
Tem um cara que é apenas um guerreiro. Solta ele e sai com a espada na mão matando os outros. O Renzo foi um herdeiro dessa mentalidade que veio do papai, que pegou o Hollis, mas que depois canalizou aquela violência dele, estudou, leu, ouviu pessoas, sofreu influências, ouviu bom senso. Então hoje ele é um cara de bom senso.
Almost 2 years before the UFC won, at the age of 23, Renzo went to São Paulo for his first official Vale Tudo match.
Veio diretamente do Rio de Janeiro para escovar aqui o pessoal do Full Contact. Se levar porrada, vai ser porrada, hein, vagabundo? Quero saber o seguinte.
Diga.
Tá treinado com esse negócio?
Tô legal. Sinta a luz aí.
Tudo bom. Vamos lá. Fala mais. Renato?
Espero que a noite hoje seja boa e que dê pra jogar a bola lá pra frente. Eu tô muito preocupado com o meu irmãozinho Ralph, o narigudo, que ele tá meio nervoso. Já comeu umas 15 vezes hoje, acordou às 6 horas da manhã. Fora o que ele levantou de noite.
Levantei só.
Quanto tempo vai ser essa luta?
São 2 rounds de 15, mas a minha vontade é ganhar no primeiro minuto, para não ter dúvida. Mas se não for possível, a gente estica até os 2 finais.
Vai ser aquela violência que foi lá no Rio de Janeiro?
De maneira nenhuma, eu sou um gentleman. Isso vai ser com a maior educação do mundo. Não filmam esse rolo, hein, rapaz? Só filmam daqui pra cima.
Se tomar um pipoco no olho de saída.
Aí fudeu, né, meu amigo? Aí você tomar uma porrada de saída, eu vou ter que dar a minha também, né, meu irmão?
Então tá certo.
Tá jóia.
Vamos esperar.
Like 4 or 5 years ago, he was fighting. He fought almost every month. He fought in Brazil, and then 2 weeks later he was fighting in Japan, and then he went to Abu Dhabi and fought again. It was like unbelievable, like a marathon.
Renzo's recent wins and Gracie name attracted many young mixed martial arts hopefuls to his new gym in Manhattan. But he soon began to have problems with a business partner, who Renzo suspected of misusing his money and name, and who later even tried to have him deported. Instead of training for more fights, Renzo had to focus on fighting back in the business arena. At the same time, more and more young Gracies were coming from Brazil. Renzo took his nephews and cousins under his wing and gave them jobs at his academy.
When I came to New York, I lived in his house for a year, over a year. He helped me fight, psychological and then technique-wise, everything. He's like, he's like a second father.
Ele abriga lá todo mundo e leva para lutar, prepara. Isso às vezes tem até prejudicado a ele. Por quê? O que acontece? Ele para de treinar para dar aula, ele vira empresário porque ele agencia os primos e os amigos, bota para lutar, e esse agenciamento, 99,9%, não tem um centavo de remuneração para ele.
Não treina, não desce nem que era para treinar. E vai lutar nas condições que está. O cara fazer isso tem que ter uma valentia e ter uma confiança muito grande. Porque a maioria das pessoas só entra ali quando estão na ponta dos cascos. Ele não. Ele entra na maneira que tiver. E não fala, não, tá mal, nada, tô bem, forte, tô em alta forma.
This is it, everybody. Gracie Taktarov in the circle of truth. The kick, and Taktarov has the leg. And Gracie delivers the kick, and he's on the floor. That's it. That's it. That's it. Gracie with the swift kick, and then the right hand. What an ending. Who could have predicted that? No one.
Most of the Gracie that people saw was more like a patient type, You over there, wait for the guy, to get tired. But Renzo is like, I want to finish the guy quick. I want to beat the guy. I want to beat the hell out of the guy. I want to finish.
How could you not stop that fight?
Renzo, from him fighting and drinking water is the same thing.
Não posso
fazendo isso. The moment you do this, you shift your weight back, you have no control of his knee. That see right away. It's like if I'm here, I push his knee. As soon as I'm here, I go here.
Renzo's academy became so successful, they had to move to a bigger location in New York. In 1997, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi sought out Renzo for private instruction, and the two formed a friendship that eventually led to the Abu Dhabi Combat Club Submission Wrestling World Championship.
Então, ele com certeza ele mudou de um cara que é beira-mar, descalço, short, para Nova York, Manhattan, que pô, é grande empreendimento, é uma mega academia, entendeu? E tem que estar presente, tem que fazer luta, e tem que gerenciar atleta, e tem que pôr a família. Mas é isso mesmo, é guerreiro, campeão. Príncipe Renzo.
Se você não tem medo, se você acredita em você, a tua tendência não é se transformar num déspota, mas é se transformar numa pessoa mais humana, mais tranquila, né? Que essa é a grande lição do velho.
sabe que eu sei, não apanha de ninguém. Como eu não apanho até hoje.
Bye.